the Bank of Canada caught lying in their own documentation. This is going to be an absolutely hilarious live stream because literally I've caught the Bank of Canada red-handed. They know we're going into a recession, continuing to hike rates and saying that the economy is strong. All of this just doesn't make sense, and we're going to dig into it right now. So first of all, let's set the narrative for this. So Bank of Canada raises rates, conditional pause due to strong economy. I mean, are any of you buying this? That the economy is really strong right now? I mean, you even just have to look at the data. I mean, this is consumer sentiment. This is the longest chart we have, unfortunately. Canada, we have the worst data, it seems, on the planet. But if you look at consumer sentiment, it's down like at these lows right now. It's not in a good place. So does that mean the economy is really strong to you? I don't really think so. And I really have to give a shout out to my good buddy George Gammon and the Rebel Capitalist channel, because he actually discovered this with the Federal Reserve in the US. And I'm going to link the video in the description after I get done here. And I would urge you to go check that out after this, because he basically uncovered the same thing. And then I thought, hold on a second. If that is going on at the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve is lying, I can guarantee that the Bank of Canada is doing the same thing. And I was absolutely right about that. So thanks a lot to George and the Rebel Capitalist channel. Really good channels, by the way. So anyway, the Bank of Canada conditionally, let's just set the tone for what they're saying about the economy currently. This is very recent. The central bank cited few signs of a recession in the labor market that remains tight. Governor McClellan pointed to elevated job vacancies, robust wage growth, and low unemployment. He also cited the Bank of Canada survey data showing businesses are having trouble finding labor. Typically, these aren't the kind of points made when the economy requires easier policy. The thing is, whatever you look for, you'll find. You know, if you're looking for strength in a stock, you'll find it. If you're looking for weakness in a stock, you'll find it. That's why you've always got to be unbiased when it comes to these things. You see, it's almost like right now that they are just looking for strength. They're looking at things that they can point to and say, oh yeah, those are okay right now, when other things are deteriorating, even by their own methods and metrics, which is what we're going to talk about right now. So this is very esoteric. That's the first thing I'll say. So stick with me here, because this is a Bank of Canada working paper that I've linked in the description. And basically, what they've done here is they have calculated the best rankings for predicting a recession in Canada. It says right here, in sample results of 3 best models that predict Canadian recessions. And I tell you what, this data gets so esoteric, and it is for a reason. They don't want you to understand it. You know, Canada is the worst for doing stuff like this. It really is much worse than the US. Even the real estate market, the statistics they put out is very esoteric. There's all these benchmark prices, different things like that, which they don't explain. And another thing with this is it's exactly the same thing. And you want to know a country that produces very esoteric data like Canada? China, because they do. Literally, it's very difficult to understand. I apologize, the sun is just rising behind my shoulder there. Apologies about that. So the US, and this is weird too, they're using the US 10-year. So, I mean, that goes to show you how these economies are tied at the hip in their view. Because if they're using the US 10-year Treasury, which is essentially, it's a 10-year note for government debt in the US. So essentially, let's say we go out and buy a US 10-year Treasury. You buy it at $95 or whatever, it's going to pay you a yield for 10 years, which is at a fixed rate. So that's what that means. And then the CP90 is basically the Canadian 90-day government bond. So it's essentially like the US Treasuries. They call them bonds in Canada. They call them gilts in the UK. And essentially the 90-day is a shorter duration. So you could buy that. It might give you 4.5%. And you're only getting that for 90 days. After 90 days, it reaches its maturity. Obviously, you can sell it before them. You can trade these securities back and forth. And there's arbitrage opportunities within doing that, which I've been taking advantage of over the past couple of months. So anyways, I'll visually show you what that is right now. So basically, this is what they're talking about, the 10-year, and then I've got the 90-day Canada government bond right here. So they're essentially talking about inversion. They're talking about one minus the other, and you get, like, when you get these negative spreads, which is basically the difference between them is negative when it should be positive. When you're talking about a 10-year debt note, you would expect to be paid a higher return because there's more risk in holding that over 10 years than 90 days. But the opposite is happening right now. Because the Bank of Canada, you have to imagine, I'm going to try and explain this in the simplest way possible. When you have interest rates, they're set across durations, and the market pretty much controls 99% of it. And all these central banks control. They like to tell you that they control the whole thing when they don't. I mean, it's obvious by what's going on in the bond market, which is bigger and more important than the stock market, which is important to remember. So when you're talking about government bonds and you're talking about these durations, it's very important to just keep that in mind, that, you know, the 10-year note, for example, carries a lot more risk than a 90-day government bond. Like, you're holding that for 90 days. So the Bank of Canada is just setting that it's setting the overnight rate. So not even 90 days, not even 30 days, overnight rate. So if they push that rate higher, all the other bonds do adjust. But as you get further out, they're not adjusting so much because it doesn't matter. Like a 10-year note, they are thinking, okay, what are the interest rates going to be like in 5 years? What are the interest rates going to be in 6 years, 3 years? All these different things. So they don't really care so much about the Bank of Canada's overnight rate, and same with the Federal Reserve. That's why you get this thing called a yield curve inversion, which is such a strong predictor of a recession. And I would argue that this one isn't as strong as the 2-year over the 10-year. We use that in this many, many times. That's what the Federal Reserve uses. But when you look at it right now, you've got the 90-day, which is at 4.4%. You've got the 10-year US at 3.629. You're talking about like 80 basis points difference. So you're getting less of a return. You're getting less of a return for holding more risk. So why is that? It's because people are pessimistic about the economy. They're thinking inflation is going to drop substantially. You know, I don't like to call this the smart money. I just like to call it the large money, because these pools of money are absolutely gigantic. And these are global markets. These are huge. So, you know, there is predictive power within that because people are hedging against what's coming in the future. And there's also a lot of insider information. You're talking about mainly financial institutions that are trading these bonds. So there's a lot of insider information. If they know something bad is coming, what they're going to do, they're going to buy these securities, obviously, because they're going to think, well, this is a good return because they're probably going to drop rates when the financial crisis comes in. And that's what's so interesting right now about Canada, is because even though they're saying here, oh, it's such a strong economy, everything is rosy, just don't worry, folks. When you look at the yield curve in Canada, it's one of the worst. Just ignore that 0%. I don't know why that's changed to that. That's not correct. Imagine if it was. But essentially, this is just all the maturities. So you've got the 1-year, 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, 30-year. So you're getting 3% for holding a government debt note for 30 years. And then for holding it for 2 years, and I think the 1 year is at 4.5%. So you're getting 4.5% for holding it for a year, and then you're getting 3%. That is substantially less for holding it for 30 years. and you're taking way, way more risk. I mean, I don't even think that the government's going to pay you back. I think the government will default in the next 30 years. The government of Canada and even the Treasury in the US will default within the next 30 years. I believe there's a high probability of that happening because they've put themselves into such a precarious position. Essentially, GDP, a large percentage of it is now just government spending. So the government just has to spend in order to keep the economy going. And every time the economy goes down, they have to spend more because the economy is even more broken than it was before, even more broken than it was in 2008. And Canada is sitting on a debt bubble of astronomical proportions. You are talking about trillions of dollars. You've got lots of people out there who just don't want to believe anything bad is going to happen. And, you know, what can you do to sort of insure yourself against that? Gold, silver, those are the best things in my opinion. That's not financial advice, but lots of people are always saying, why don't you give any solutions? And I really don't like to tell people what to do with their money because my risk tolerance is different to other people, and I understand that, and I don't want to give people financial advice. So really, like gold and silver, that's what we hold as insurance. And, you know, we have it vaulted in Canada right now, but I don't even trust Canada. I really don't even trust Canada to store it. So we're actually looking at moving it outside of Canada to somewhere that's a bit more neutral, because I just think that unbelievable things are going to happen over the next 30 years. And when they say inflation is coming down, I want to be clear about this. When they say inflation is coming down, so the bond market is projecting inflation is going to come down, that's because there's going to be some sort of recession or depression. That's why it's going to come down substantially. That's why rates are going to come down substantially in their view. But then what happens after that, we don't know. Does inflation come back with vengeance? In my opinion, probably. Do we enter an even larger tightening cycle, an even more painful one? I think it's likely, because when you look at these 20-year cycles, and I'll link a video at the end of this one where I went through these 20-year cycles. It's not as refined as my current videos, but it's very interesting to watch because it was all based on historic data and these 40-year cycles of interest rate hikes, and we've just been through a 40-year cycle of rates going down and then coming up and then going down, but they were always coming up to a lower high and going down to a lower low, whereas now we've actually gone up to a higher high and we could come down to a higher low, and essentially then things, you know, are really, really bad. It's really, really bad if you hold debt, because the value of debt is what's at risk here. And if there's debt destruction as well, there'll be immense deflation. You know, people talk about the money printing. Money printing has really mainly occurred within financial assets like the stock market, like the real estate market. The real estate market specifically in Canada is where 90% of that has been created. So that's where all your money printing is. But what people miss is that that can actually be destroyed. All that money can be destroyed. It doesn't really exist anyway. It's all just digits on screen. But when people default, they get foreclosed on, those loans have to be destroyed. That is destruction of that money printing that we had before. And then that creates a whole different dynamic, because that means you're getting deflation for all these financial assets instead of the inflation that we've seen before. So I think it's incredibly interesting. Maybe rewatch this video if you haven't quite fully understood it. I know I tried to explain it the best way I could, and I hope it came across to you. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, you might like this one. I'll link that video that I was mentioning here. You might also like this one, and I'll also link Rebel Capitalist and that specific video that I mentioned for the US, because I think it's incredibly important to watch that video. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.